wonderful blessing of the internet, actually, and it is quite the privilege to be with you all today. And speaking of privileges, it is very much our pleasure to introduce Shobha Sharma, who will be presenting on speech and health today. Very intriguing and important and timely and relevant topic, really. And it points to the sure um, power of speech and silence and uh, making theosophy a living, practical reality in one's day-to-day life. And I will just share the screen briefly here. And this is the lovely flyer that is created by Maria Garcia. And she has included this beautiful quote from Hermes: "By purifying words, speech, and the aura around words, and by cleansing one's motivation, one's tone of voice, and one's movements, one can reorient oneself and so draw fine elements into one's sphere." And Shobha, we look forward to hearing what you have, and then after that, she'll take questions, and we can all chime in on a conversation.
Thank you, Jonathan. As you know, this is about speech and health, and I'm very curious to see what's going to be coming from Gems from the East, the other side. It'll be interesting. Spoken language has existed from the earliest times, and the oldest texts have been transmitted orally. Oral texts, according to modern standards, requires superior powers of memory. When one looks at the Rig Veda alone, it is made up of 1,000,000 words. The hymn to Vak, which is a Sanskrit word for speech, it starts with this memorable verse: "When, O Lord of the Word, the wise established name-giving, the first principles of language, their inmost excellence, pristine and pure, hidden deep within, was brought to light through love. And later, when men of the word, companions worship, refining in their hearts flashes of insight, some attain awareness of knowledge, others wander mouthing empty words. Those who move neither forward nor backward are not men of the word, nor refiners of essence. Poor craftsmen, mishandling the word, spinning frail threads of self-regard." I find this very pertinent to what I'll be talking about later. Following this, much later, but still long ago for us, before the marking of time with centuries, we hear from Plato's Phaedrus, where the Egyptian king Thamus tells the inventor of writing, Theot, of the superiority of memory. And he says, "You, who are the father of letters, from a paternal love of your own children, have been led to attribute to them a quality that they cannot have. For this discovery of yours will create forgetfulness in the learner's souls, because they will not use their memories. They will trust to the external written characters and not remember of themselves. The specific which you have discovered is an aid not to memory, but to reminiscence. And you give your disciples not truth, but only the semblance of truth. They will be hearers of many things and will have learned nothing. They will appear to be omniscient and will generally know nothing. They will be tiresome company, having the show of wisdom without the reality. So, from the oral tradition, which requires usage of another part of the brain, we came to written texts. And yet, those early written texts were superior than what we mostly have today, with the invention of the alphabet and the permutations and combinations of these letters that comprise a language. To add to that, today in the 21st century, we are bombarded with internet and text messages that use shorthand. Nothing like the shorthand of the 60s and 50s, but with symbols like LMK and LOL, for example. Even the beauty of shorthand, with its charming squiggles, have been replaced with symbols that do not require too much creativity and imagination, and has even cut down on speech. Yet, with all this, there are oral languages that are in existence today without a written script and pictorial representations, like the Chinese and Japanese, hearkening to the very early cuneiform writing found in Sumer, Mesopotamia, about 5,000 years ago, which is believed to be based on a counting system. These kinds of languages used symbols and pictograms to convey meaning. The evolution of and the story of writing itself is quite fascinating. H.P. Blavatsky in The Secret Doctrine, Volume 1, page 306, explains that an emblem is not a symbol and states, to put it still plainer, an emblem is usually a series of graphic pictures viewed and explained allegorically and unfolding an idea in panoramic views, one after the other. Thus, the Puranas are a written emblems. So are the Mosaic and Christian testaments, or the Bible, and all other exoteric scriptures. And then she continues. All esoteric societies have made use of emblems and symbols, such as the Pythagorean society, the Eleusinian, the Hermetic Brethren of Egypt, the Rosicrucians, and the Freemasons. Now, many of these emblems, it is not proper to divulge to the general eye, and a very minute difference may make the emblem or symbol differ widely in its meaning. The magical sigille, that's a word she uses for the seals, the kind of seals, being founded on certain principles of numbers, partake of this character, and although monstrous or ridiculous in the eyes of the uninstructed, convey a whole body of doctrine to those who have been trained to recognize them. This takes us back earlier to The Secret Doctrine, page 272, where she says, talking about the ancient source of wisdom, but such is the mysterious power of occult symbolism that the facts which have actually occupied countless generations of sages and seers and prophets to marshal, to set down and explain in the bewildering series of evolutionary progress, are all recorded on a few pages of geometrical signs and glyphs. Again, in The Voice of the Silence, H.P. Blavatsky talks about the writing of this little gem that we quote from so often. She states, the work from which I hear, namely to write The Voice of the Silence, translate, forms part of the same series that from which the stanzas of the Book of Zion were taken, on which the secret doctrine is based. She adds that this portion from the Book of Zion is also called the Book of Golden Precepts, which she says claims the same origin as Nagarjuna's Paramartha, which was, according to legend, transmitted to Nagarjuna by the Nagas or serpents, in reality, initiates. The original precepts are engraved on thin oblong squares, copies very often on discs. They are written variously, sometimes in Tibetan, but mostly in ideographs. And now an ideograph is a character, a symbol or figure which suggests the idea of an object without expressing its name. The sacerdotal language, Senza, besides an alphabet of its own, may be rendered in several modes of writing in cipher characters. Just have to remember that the word cipher doesn't refer to zero, but to a code. And so this partakes more of the nature of ideographs than of syllables. When the ideographs are used, there is a definite mode of reading the text. She states that the permutations and combinations of the 12 animal symbols in the zodiac, the 7 colors of the rainbow, and the 5 elements create an alphabet of 60 sacred letters and 12 signs. And she adds, a sign placed at the beginning of the text determines whether the reader has to spell it according to the Indian mode, when every word is simply a Sanskrit adaptation, or according to the Chinese principle of reading the pictures. The easiest way, however, is that which allows the reader to use no special or any language he likes, as the signs and symbols were, like the Arabic numerals or figures, common and international property among initiated mystics and their disciples. Imagine such a remarkable mode of communication. In the light of the path, we learn what is demanded of the neophyte. It says, speech is the power of communication. The moment of active life is, entrance into active life is marked by its attainment. And when he, the neophyte, is horror-struck by the imperfect manner in which he uses speech, we learn that then comes the desire to do it well. And with the desire, thus to help others, comes the power. For it is a pure desire, this which comes upon him. He can gain no credit, no glory, no personal reward by fulfilling it. And therefore, he obtains the power to fulfill it. This section closes with the sentence, his nature is transformed, and the selfishness which prompts men's action in ordinary life suddenly deserts him. But we know that this doesn't come overnight. There is so much preparation for the student to even get to the neophyte stage. When I was younger and spunkier, my mother, who was quite a contrast to me, used to look at me with her soft eyes and say, "How will you throw out the trash tomorrow?" This is a favorite expression among mothers of my generation, and it is a literal translation from my language, Tamil. It can be interpreted in 2 ways. How will you interact with your in-laws and life partner once you are married if you continue to behave in this way? Or how will you interact with everyone around you once you're an adult? Throwing out the trash, or rather, I should probably say transforming the trash, is of extreme importance for all of us. All of our devotional books, Light on the Path, The Voice of the Silence, Dhammapada, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, as well as the Bhagavad Gita, instruct us so beautifully as to how we go about doing this. Unless we genuinely work on keeping a healthy mind and heart, besides a healthy body, we will not be ready to really speak. So, what is a healthy mind and heart? What do I mean by this? Keeping this physical body healthy is one of the easiest because we know what is needed through the different kinds of doctors we have around us. Preventive care is achieved by eating a balanced meal every day. Regarding this, Mr. B.P. Wadia has some wise words for us. He states in his book, The Building of the Home, the health of man depends on the nourishment he imbibes, this on every plane. The state of man's mind is the result of the thoughts he has gathered in the past and which he now holds. His character is formed by the ethical ideas and the moral principles he has absorbed. His bodily health is the outcome of his mental and moral states, plus the food he eats. He continues, the lives which build the cell of the physical body are influenced by our kama manas, but they are also influenced by the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the food we eat. Occultism teaches that disease of the very tissues of man's body is nothing more or less than the organic, nutritive, physiological sin of separateness. One of the Sanskrit names for the physical body is Annamaya Kosha, which actually means the sheath of food. Quoting from the notes on the Bhagavad Gita, page 223, he elaborates on the food we eat. The question never is of kinds of food, but of fitness for each particular case. For when all is said and done, each body extracts from any kind of food only that which conforms to the nature of the possessor of the body. And that nature is subject to change from within. The main thing to be observed is to keep the body efficient as an instrument for the soul who inhabits it, by whatever means, and food may be found necessary for that purpose. Here, like and dislike are set aside, and only the purpose of the soul is considered. Here, Mr. Wadia, talking about our eating habits, urges us to show temperance, not to eat more than enough or too little. Whatever the food, this should be the rule, he says. Our lower quaternary rules our daily lives, since intermingled with the physical body, we feel emotions, thoughts, and feelings that affect our daily lives. We are surrounded by different issues in the 21st century that are now being spoken out in the open. Let us look at mental illnesses and addiction. There are enough cases of addiction and mental illnesses in and around my family, and maybe some of the rest of us have similar stories. How do we react to it? I remember when my husband became a psychiatrist, his classmates who had picked other fields in medicine would say things like, so, how are the crazies doing? Though I always found that jarring and offensive, my husband would react quietly and patiently and try to explain that mental illness is like any other illness in the body. Our health in this matter is vital to constantly remember that if we are for universal brotherhood and sisterhood, we need to embrace all these members of our society with love and compassion, and of course, treat the sickness and not condemn the person. If we are open about mental illnesses, are we then willing to talk about diversity of sexual behavior, the LGBTQ plus communities. As a young person, perhaps some of us, including me, laughed or made fun of such people. But as we grew and got educated and studied history, we understood the diversity of humans and tried to embrace and respect different groups of people. In fact, the health and growth of a city relies on how we treat the so-called outliers and abnormal people, words that should not even be used for anyone. As a student of theosophy, we cannot shut our eyes from all this or hide our heads in the sand like an ostrich. Least of all can we condemn or castigate their lives like the draconian laws that are being passed in so many states. In the words of Rodney King, why can't we just all get along? In fact, even in the Mahabharata, Arjuna dresses as a Shikandin when banished to the forest. A Shikandin was usually a male who would dress up in women's clothes and dance and entertain people. And Arjuna is the one who chose Krishna to get his message for spiritual enlightenment in the delightful, insightful book called the Bhagavad Gita. There was a famous writer in my language whose stories were published in a local magazine, and one of the stories was called They Are Inside. He was talking about mental health institution. So who is to decide who is normal or abnormal, out or in? We can say now that speech, words, and health of a human being are all intimately connected. The health involves preparing the soil before speech or words. Let us pause and consider the first two, speech and words. As already mentioned, we talked about the evolution of writing, focusing on the pictorial cuneiform as well as the senza form. Now these writings, symbols, and emblems get life when they are read aloud. We know about the Gregorian chants. We know about the chants of Hindu Vedic scriptures done by priests. The combination of sound, intonation gives great power to these symbols. At the same time, when it's not done properly, it can create a lot of chaos and problems. In fact, as stated by Plato's Phaedrus, this involves memory. The tradition of reading aloud to children, or even in family gatherings, where reading aloud was common or is common, it is remarkable how that manner of learning sticks in the memory of human beings. And yet, Patanjali, right at the outset of the Yoga Sutras, states in the second verse itself, Yogas chitta vritti nirodha, or concentration of yoga is the hindering of the modifications of the thinking principles. And one of the modifications of the thinking principle comes immediately in the fifth verse, where it talks about memory or smritya. So even though the oral tradition lauded by Plato earlier for aiding memory has to be hindered, and speech itself needs to be transformed. So how do we begin to even understand all this? Once again, I turn to the devotional books for help. Just as we talked about health from a basic emotional and mental level, we need to go some steps further to talk about the Kama Manasik health we need as well. So when I first started going to Theosophy school as a teenager, we talked about lives surrounding us. So, whether it is about atoms, elementals, or the lower astral plane, it is teeming with energy, life of all forms. And so, right at the beginning of the light on the path, the writer states, before the eyes can see, they must be incapable of tears. Before the ear can hear, it must have lost its sensitiveness. Before the voice can speak in the presence of the masters, it must have lost the power to wound. Before the soul can stand in the presence of the masters, its feet must be washed in the blood of the heart. Powerful words indeed, and it reiterates the point of lives all around us that affect what we say, see, hear. So the whole of the Light on the Path talks about the steps we need to take to achieve how to speak. Earlier, we have already talked about the demand of the neophyte, and the school of Pythagoras did just that. The beginners, or the rookies as we say today, had to keep silent and observe and learn. The power of the voice and speech is sacred and requires preparation. In fact, even though right speech is advocated by the Buddha, right speech also cannot start before there is silence and assimilation by observation. Only then is the disciple ready to speak and follow one of the Noble Eightfold Path, which is called right speech. The Dakshinamurti Sloka. Dakshinamurti is shlokas dedicated to Shiva, facing south. So the Dakshinamurti Shloka emphasizes that when the disciple uses the inner voice and does not need to use speech as we know it, true understanding develops. The particular shloka says in English, I'm translating it in English, behold the banyan tree. The teacher is young. The students are old. The teaching is silence, and all doubts disappear. Some of this preparation to get to this stage can also take place through meditation, and the steps involved are outlined in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. H.P. Blavatsky, in an article written in 1882 in the Theosophists, is found as under the title The Universe in a Nutshell in the Theosophical Articles, Volume 1, page 298. Here, H.P. Blavatsky says, the stronger the spirituality of the faculties of the latter, she's talking about the inner ego, the easier it will be for the ego to awake the sleeping hemispheres, arouse into activity the sensory ganglia and the cerebellum, and to impress the former, which is the physical brain, always in full inactivity and rest during the deep sleep of man, with the vivid picture of the subject so transferred. In other words, the porosity between the higher self and the lower self, or the noetic and the psychic, leads to greater enlightenment of man. In short, the disciple has to prepare the ground with good health before he can speak, because right speech is powerful and can be healing and beneficial. Certain languages like Senza, Sanskrit, according to H.P. Blavatsky, also convey meaning succinctly. However, when used unwisely, it can create harmful effects. William Quan Judge wrote this in Letters That Have Helped Me, Book 1, 14. Words are things, with me and in fact. upon the lower plane of social intercourse, they are things, but soulless and dead, because that convention in which they have their birth has made abortions of them. But when we step away from that conventionality, they become alive in proportion to the reality of the thought and its purity that is behind them. Let us use with care those living messengers called words. And then he says, begin by trying to conquer the habit, almost universal, of pushing yourself forward. This arises from personality. Do not monopolize the conversation. He advises listening to the other person, and he says, your only true greatness lies in your inner true self, and it is not desirous of obtaining the applause of others. How beautifully he states it. So, the path is long and tedious for the eternal pilgrim, but one's attitude and perseverance can make it finally joyous. I shall end this presentation with a few words from the Light on the Path. Listen to the song of life. Store in your memory the melody you hear. Learn from it the lesson of harmony. Life itself has speech and is never silent, and its utterance is not, as you that are deaf may suppose, a cry. It is a song. Learn from it that you are a part of the harmony. Learn from it to obey the laws of the harmony. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Shobha. That was pure Brahmavak, if I can say that.
Thank you.
Judy, do you have a question? Comment? You'll have to unmute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Yes, okay. Beautiful presentation, Shobha. I'm sorry I was a little late, but I did hear most of what you had to say, which was beautiful. But I just want to ask if you can apply this also to other traditions, and with the idea of knowledge, because in the book of Job in the Hebrew Bible, there is a very powerful statement that says, who is this that darkeneth counsel with speech and with words without knowledge? Attain to knowledge and you will attain to speech.
Yes.
And how can we apply what people like Judge and Patanjali have said about that? Because I think Job is about initiation.
Thank you, Judy. Baby steps, right? We start with baby steps. That's what we are doing. The very fact that we try to get together in these Aquarian series, the very fact that we attend meetings and try to listen and learn, the fact that we have this Sangha, the brotherhood through Zoom. So even though I find sometimes technology drives me crazy with all the shorthand that we use, I also think it has given us such a wonderful opportunity to discuss all this. So I think it is how we live our daily lives. You know, Theosophy has a lot of metaphysics, but the metaphysics have no meaning if the ethics are not combined with it, right? So that's why I spent most of my talk today on looking at our devotional books, and there is so much information out there. practical information. The problem is applying it, right? Applying it is very hard. I shall talk about myself because I only know how I behave. It is so easy when you're in mixed company and you see different kinds of behavior to make judgments about people. Because we talk so much about the higher and the lower self in theosophy, the dual nature of man, we have to constantly keep checking ourselves when we make judgment on others, right? It is so easy to do it. But instead of beating ourselves, we should feel good every time we make the right decision. And that is why I love the self-examination that is talked about in the Pythagorean school. How did your day go? What did you do today? What do you feel good about? What do you feel bad about? That's where the chance for improvement happens. And one of the most beautiful, I wish I could remember, and I think I think Jonathan pointed it out a few weeks ago in one of the classes about the fact that don't try to do self-examination when you're falling asleep. Try to do that just before you fall asleep, maybe about 10-15 minutes before you are ready to go to bed, because you really need to focus on that self-examination. Hints and clues are given in our in a lot of our writings, and that article, Universe in a Nutshell, talks about the need to remember what we do when we fall asleep, right? The need to bring it back, to have that porosity, to retain it and bring it back. So that's where we also learn. We have other techniques too. We talk about meditation. So self-examination, there's so many little hints and clues given in our books. Does that answer the question, Judy?
Well, in part it did, but the whole question, I think, is of knowledge. I mean, having been too much of an academic, I always think, well, I don't want to speak in a forum unless I think I really know the subject, and this person is being upbraided because he's darkening counsel with words without knowledge. And I think this happens so much in discourse that people don't listen, and therefore they do not have the knowledge to talk. And maybe that's the reason for the Pythagorean 5 years of silence,
Right.
so that you can really attain to something to say before you do say it.
Yeah, that in fact the hymn Tuvak, which I read right in the beginning, talks about that, when it says that some attain awareness of knowledge, others wander mouthing empty words, right? So knowledge definitely is important. That's why I said we need to have the metaphysics, the knowledge, and the practical. One cannot be without the other. You can't just, virtue alone is like a lame person without the eyes to see. I'm sorry, is like a blind person without the eyes to see. So you need both. You need the virtues, and you do need the knowledge and understanding of what it means to be a disciple, a shravaka, a listener, and a learner.
Yes, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Looks
Thank
like,
you, Judy.
Laura has her hand up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Laura?
Well, thinking about knowledge, and how is knowledge gained except through experience? And here we are as students sharing a profound wisdom religion before we even know what it means. But it seems before we even understand it or even have a knowledge of it complete. And so it seems that knowledge is gained through experience. And experience comes from doing things wrong and then seeing it and then making the adjustment. So it seems that the universe at this stage of our evolution always tells us about our lack of knowledge after we reveal it rather than before.
Right.
So
Yeah, very beautiful. Yeah.
is there
Thank
any
you.
way to gain knowledge without experience?
I don't think it's possible, but I just cannot help going back to Bhavani Shankar's article about I think it's called Commentaries on the Bhagavad Gita. I keep forgetting the name of the book that he wrote about the Bhagavad Gita, but he talks about several stages of devotion. And I think devotion is also, I mean, the word devotion is so misunderstood, right? It seems like it's a blind following of something, but it involves a lot of knowledge. You start in the beginning by listening. So I really think the Pythagorean system seems to have so much understanding of how to go about this business of gaining experience. And one of the first things is by silence and listening, right? Judge's quotation talks about that. Listening to others and to appear like nothing in the eyes of men, right? Because the higher self doesn't care. It's not desirous of obtaining the applause from others, he says. So I think it's the process of learning, the process of understanding requires so much humility, knowledge. And even we remember in the 7 portals, even when the disciple has reached the 7th gate, a sense of pride can mar the work, it says in the Voice of the Silence. So humility needs to be there all the time. A sense like, I am here to learn. I may know a lot, but still there is so much I need to know. Right? So I think, that's why I think this hymn to Vak is so beautiful, because so neatly they introduce all these things about how we use speech. Today, how we use speech, what we see around us. And I think it just tells us it's better to just keep silent. Sometimes I do something with the TV. I switch off I get the mute button, and I'd rather watch their mouths moving. And because I feel like what they say really, 90% of the time is just the same thing again and again. So I'm just saying, it's we really need to work on that listening, and here I am keep talking, but such is my role today. But it's important. It's important to listen.
Well, I wonder too that the gratitude that HPB had to India for preserving the language.
Right.
Her job of sharing theosophy would have been much more difficult if it hadn't been for the preservation of language. Absolutely. And we look at the materialism of today, and we wonder that when language is diminished, as you mentioned, by the internet language and lingo, that it also diminishes our human experience.
Right.
We lose something about our own nature without the language to describe it.
Absolutely. There have been so many languages that have disappeared, which is such a sad thing, in today's day and age, because so many communities have disappeared that spoke those languages. Whether it's in the Native American community or in communities in India, so many tribal languages have disappeared over the years and centuries, and I always think of this, ever since the calculator came, I used to teach math. Ever since the calculator came, students don't know how to draw graphs. It just amazes me. They have no clue how to draw graphs because the calculator does it for them. They just have to feed the data and it draws the graph, right? So if language is disappearing, certain things that we used to do are also disappearing in education today, right? When we teach, we find there are so many things that are obsolete that were used when I was in school. So I'm just saying that as an example to say how we have atrophied certain talents. David, do you have a question?
I think it's
I was. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. There's an old saying. How does it go? I've got all the answers, but what was the question? And I'm wondering, you're talking about education. How do we cultivate a sense of wonder in people or in ourselves, children? There's lots of information out there and we're fed all the answers, but without wonder, how can we really get knowledge of any sort of meaningful sort in our lives?
Yeah, I do agree. I remember when I was so naive, I didn't realize one of the students knew the answer to a question I asked in class. And then he sheepishly admitted that he had just looked at the internet to find the answer. And I thought, really, where are the critical thinking skills now? Forget about children. What about adults? Where are the critical thinking skills? We seem to have just allowed it to die. So yeah, that's a good point, David. Thank you.
I wonder that losing that skill, the critical thinking skill, how that affects us as the health that you mentioned, that it must really have an impact on our mental health in that way, that it must be contributing to the problems that we have today.
Well, the whole of the ISIS Unveiled, H.P. Blavatsky talks about lives, right? She says there's not one space out there. We talk about space, right? Space is not empty. There's so much there. Just because we can't see it doesn't mean it's not there, right? So those influences are out there. And if people don't have critical thinking skills, if they are not questioning things, think about the Socratic method of debate. Even today, we look longingly at the Lincoln-Douglas debates and talk about that. What kind of debates do we have today? Any of that order? The television, in a way, has kind of caused a problem with that kind of communication, right? So it used to be on radio, right, when we used to listen. But look what has happened, and the banality, the banal stuff that goes on in the debates. There's no critical thinking. There's no. It's all jingoism. Just like this, what it says in this Zabak. Others wander, mouthing empty words or spinning frail threads of self-regard. It's so topical today. The same thing is going on. It's all about themselves. It's nothing profound, nothing insightful, nothing meaningful. I'm not saying all of it is like that, but a lot of it is like that.
Well, in the schools, they're talking more and more of, especially since the pandemic, of the behavioral problems of children. And maybe the cause of those behavioral problems is the adults and their speech and their language and their way of talking itself is throwing them into confusion and difficulties, because they often talk about how, It's important that the parents don't argue in front of the children, that they come to an agreement before they talk with the children. And so when you see all these adults expressing language of self-regard, it must throw the children into confusion and maybe cause the cause of these behavioral problems that we see around us. Do you think it has an impact? As you said, every thought is out there in space.
Right. It's funny. When the pandemic first started, I thought what a golden opportunity for us to realize, understand climate change, do something about it, because we were not using our cars. There was less pollution. The air was clearer. So, whenever there's an opportunity like this, it's such a sad thing that we did not use it to make things better. And we have gone the other way, because I always think whenever there is something happening, any kind of a situation, you can go both ways, right? You can learn a lot from it. You can make lemonade out of lemons, like they say, but we didn't take that opportunity. And I find that very sad, because I had a lot of hope. Now, the other thing that really worried me a lot was for the children, because not only were they cooped up in the house, they never had a chance to socially interact with children their age. So I think the group that got very badly affected, adversely affected, I always feel, are the younger children, especially at the age when they need to interact. So I think we had some golden opportunities, but we also had a lot of issues that were troubling. And probably this thing of being cooped up, it also increased domestic violence. And there were cases, a lot of issues like that. And people dying because they were too afraid to come out during COVID. So I think it has led to a lot of adverse, but I had always hoped that we would do something sensible out of the fact when we learned that the air was cleaner because we were not using our cars and automobiles and our vehicles.
Jim or Michelle?
Yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Shobha.
Thank you
for your wonderful presentation.
Thank you.
I'm wondering, what do you think? Because today we engage in a lot of writing, emails, texts, and as well as social media and such. How do you think that speech translated into words in that way? How do you think that affects health? Do you think it's just as important as actual speech? Or what are your thoughts on it?
I'm not totally against this form of communication. I'm not saying, though I make fun of all what I just said, LNK. I mean, for a while, I didn't even know what they meant. I had to ask my niece, like, what's that? What's this? All these different acronyms. And everybody uses it, I find. So it's like, what are they saying? I think it's a new language. I don't have to deplore it completely. It's a good, quick way. The advantages, the good things about text and everything is it's immediate, right? That's amazing. So I'm not going to completely denigrate it, but we need to be thoughtful. One of the things I do is when I write something, and of course, you have this crazy autocorrect that decides what you want to say, and it says something totally idiotic and inappropriate. So I make a joke out of it. That's all I can do. So I find it funny. But I just think, see, there are two ways of looking at it. One way is, oh my God, anything new? I'm looking for the old good days or something like that. But I also think there are some amazing things that we are able to do. Like what we are doing right now is just amazing. Look at this. I'm here in Florida and you are somewhere in the West Coast, and I'm able to communicate with you and share these ideas, which is so exciting. So technology can be both a bane and a boon. So I'm not going to denigrate it completely.
Yes. What do you think about words, though? When you translate speech into words in an email, or you're writing something, an article or something, do you think that has the same effect on health? Not necessarily slang terms like is used today, but just the actual written word.
You know, like Plato's Phaedrus says, yeah, you no longer are using certain parts of your brain when you're just looking at written text. You know, it doesn't matter if it's a letter, but there's the thing about email is it's much more thoughtful than if you were to send a text, right? Think about it, right? It's short and sweet, the text. So you have to be very, how shall I say it, succinct in how you express yourself. Whereas in an email, you can explain yourself a little more. I think they all affect us in different ways, Michelle. You know, speech affects us in a certain way, right? The tone of the voice, the way something is conveyed, right? There are vibrations all around us. There are lives around us. So how we speak, when I am angry with my son or my partner, I'm going to yell, right? And what does that create? It creates its own terrible consequences, right? But when I say the same thing in a softer, thinking, voice where I think it out and I say it, it has a different effect. So speech definitely is a different thing than words written on a piece of paper. Both have their pluses and minuses. And I think one of the most wonderful things that I grew up with was family members reading aloud. We would practically at least once a week, we would all gather together and read something, and we would listen to it. One of us would read and we would all listen. It was such a wonderful way of sharing something. So I think speech has its time and place. Silence has its time and place. And writing definitely has its time and place. What would we do without books? I mean, we read all the books that have been written. Till recently, everything was in our books. We were carrying our heavy Secret Doctrine or ISIS or any of the other books and reading. So I just think we have to be cognizant of the fact that what each medium does to us, whether it's speech, silence, words, whatever form they are. No wonder H.P. Blavatsky praised Sanskrit and the censor and talks about pictorial languages like Japanese and Chinese. Imagine, anybody among us who has learned these languages, what a different brain, the brain goes through such changes every time you learn a new language, and a language like Chinese or Japanese or even Indian languages, because you have to learn the script, right? What is happening into that brain of ours? So absolutely every different medium we use to convey meaning creates different changes within us.
Wonderful. Thank you, Shobha.
Thank you.
David?
I just thought that if we want to learn really how to use language, we should read the great poets. They know how to use language.
Mm-hmm.
Because they take us on a journey with their words,
Yes.
It's magical when it's, why Shakespeare's still with us all these years later, even in that funny old English language, because
Absolutely.
something very potent and powerful there. Yeah.
Absolutely. There is a Tamil poet called Thiruvalluvar. He wrote couplets, and for a long time in the buses in Chennai, they used to have the couplets. And I have to say, I never studied the language, and that's old Tamil, so I didn't know. But later, over the years, it's amazing how much not only is there poetry, but meaning and thought put into it. Even these verses that have been translated in English of the Sanskrit hymn to Vak is so beautiful. It's so beautiful and so well done. I can imagine how the original would be, if I could find it and read it, from the Rig Veda. Poetry definitely takes us to a different realm. And that's why I like songs do that too, right? Certain songs, not all songs, but certain songs definitely take you to a different plane. So you transcend language then, or that's a different language.
This juxtaposition of ideas of speech and health, and you did mention health with reference to food, and then it was so interesting was, I guess, the subjective component. In other words, you said that the body assimilates. Forgot how you said it, but something to do with the idea that according to our thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
And food has to do with what goes into the mouth. Speech has to do with what comes out of the mouth. Mm-hmm. There must be something symbolic or even esoteric, I guess, about the mouth. And I guess it's just the power of sound. But do you have any thoughts about the symbolism of the mouth, or is that too weird of a question?
Yeah, well, no, not really. I was just thinking about Durga, who comes in the form of Kali with her mouth all open and taking in all the things. Also, when you remember the divine, the Vishwarupa, which is chapter 11, right, in the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna gets scared when he sees all those terrible things being swallowed in. But I also think about Shiva, in the Trimurti. When I think of Shiva, you think of the destruction and then the regeneration, right? And those are all important. You need Brahma, you need Vishnu, but you also definitely need Shiva. Look at the dung beetle that converts dung into something else. And I mean, that may seem like a disgusting thing, but it's a very necessary thing for the evolution, the cyclic conversions. So I think that I always felt this. I don't want to have a mirror in front of me when I'm eating, because it does look kind of pretty, I don't know, not all that elegant. Let me put it to you that way. It doesn't look very elegant, but it's a process of conversion, right? You're taking solids and converting it into a pasty form so that it can be digested. That's the process, right? So that's why when people talk when they are eating, it doesn't look all that exciting. But the point is, these are all necessary functions. Some of these functions may not look very elegant, whatever elegance means, right? The words we use, right? Again, how we use these words. But I think they're all necessary functions. So what goes in does create an effect. But what comes out is more important, right? That's why don't worry about what kind of food you eat, so long as it's healthy and balanced, and then it's moderation, right? So, but what's more important is what comes out of your mouth after you eat. There's
Lori?
Kelly there. I think
Oh,
it's,
Kelly.
yeah,
Yeah, Lori Kelly.
Kelly.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I was curious if BP Wadia ever wrote about. I know that Theosophy doesn't talk much about prayer over food, or giving thanks, or being grateful, or saying a prayer of gratitude for the food, which would come from the mouth, and the vok, that kind of vok, and how that would interact with our body if we eat it, or when we eat it. So I didn't know if you have information on that.
I don't, but you know, in the Hindu tradition, people who are, I grew up, I watched this all my life because my grandmother used to do this. We would not eat the food until it was blessed by the Lord, the gods. It's called Naivedyam. You give it to the gods first. They partake of it, and then you partake of it. You don't eat it till you give it to the gods. I look at it very symbolically. It's like saying, I am giving this to my higher self. I want this to make me have good thoughts and do good deeds. It's like that. You first offer it to the gods. So symbolically, it's a beautiful gesture. And then you partake of it. Because in that process, it's like many people say grace before they eat. I mean, it's become a very mechanical process. But what a beautiful thing, you know. I'm thankful for the food I have. Many people just say it in a very secular way. They say, I'm thankful for the food. I'm thankful for the people who cooked it for me. One of the things we say in India when we go and eat at somebody's house is, we thank the person who made the food. Because that is also an important thing. Somebody made that food for us and gave us sustenance, right? So we bless the person who made the food in our own way. There are different ways of doing it. But I think those are all wonderful gestures that tell us that the food, many organizations that I have worked with who talked about where the food is coming from, why it's important to know where it's grown, who grew it, what did they use to grow it. So the Lokavo movement is also extremely important. To know where your food came from is 90% of the time we don't know, right? Because they come in cans or they come in bottles. But if you made your own food and you knew where it was grown, well, the organic movement is another one of those which has talked about where is the food coming from, from a very physical point of view. But it's also very important to know what you are putting into your body. Ken, do you have a question?
Yes, I was wondering if you could elaborate on something you mentioned earlier, Shobha, that the state of the body of the person and their vestures has to do with how much they can assimilate either the food or the knowledge or the training that they're getting, the information. Can you say a little bit more about that?
Yeah.
How can we adjust the state
From the
of our
physical
bodies?
point of view, it's very easy to understand, right? Depending on what kind of ailments or issues you have, the way you assimilate is based on that, right? But it's also depends on your mental attitude. You know, when you are very, I normally hear this when people are very unhappy and things are really bad, you don't feel like eating, or you are very absent-minded when you eat. So your mental makeup, your emotional makeup does affect the way you imbibe things, right? So I think they're all very intimately connected. We don't pay attention to all this. But I'm sure H.P. Blavatsky talks about it somewhere. I've got to just go and do a search for a word and, we may be able to find it if we did it online. Because it's harder to look through the index, it may not be there. But I think definitely every part of us is affected. When I talked about lives, we use the general word lives, but what exactly are they? What could they be? They could be forces, right? And they could be our own thoughts. In the Voice, it says, a harsh word uttered in past lives is not forgotten, but comes back, right? A harsh word uttered. So the karma is right there. The cause and effect is right there. So our interactions, so the same way how we are, how we feel affects the way our food is assimilated, not just on the physical level, but on all levels.
Yes,
Does that answer somewhat?
Yes, I've heard of something called a leaky gut syndrome and how we're not able to absorb micronutrients on the physical level. So is it, I guess, conceivable that on other levels and other vestures, we're not able to absorb things? So if we're totally focused on the kama manas, we can't get into the higher vibrations and higher influences.
Yeah, one of the things they always say is that at the dinner table or lunch table or wherever, these days, who eats together? That's another thing. The eating together, that whole sangha, that brotherhood and sisterhood is gone these days. The children come in and say, I've got a class, I've got to go, I don't have time to eat, and they grab something and run. I mean, everybody, they work late, overtime, So this question of sitting at the dinner table and eating doesn't exist in every home. But even that process, and one of the reasons I brought that up is the dinner table is the time when you sit together and talk and be in a calm mind and eat together. And more often than not, that's where some controversy will come up, and then there's crying, there's yelling, there's, all too often, right? In a family table. But the idea is to sit together, is to eat in a calm, friendly, convivial manner, right?
Yes, well, thank you.
Thank you.
Well, David, do you want to?
Just one last thing. And I would also suggest that as preparers of food, it's very important to, be present and be putting the highest and best thought into the preparation. And and there's even that pranic level probably that's transmitted to some degree into the food itself. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, the love with which it is done. I was in Panama and I got food. We had food delivered. We were a small group, and the two women came and served it. And I said, "Who made this?" She said, "My mother. My mother made this." And I thought, with love it was made. She said she made it with love, and I thought, what a beautiful thing to say.
So we're kind of out of time, but Nathan, do you have a last?
I do. From Bhavani Shankar, I found this really brought up this quote, and I'm glad I found it just in time. It's from the Jewel in the Lotus called Shabda Brahman. What is true of the macrocosm, Brahmanda, is also true of the microcosm, Hindanda. The two great forces in nature, attraction and repulsion, are both included in Kundalini, which, according to our scriptures, is a manifestation of his Shakti residing or latent in the Muladhara chakra, sacral plexus, which is closely connected with the earth. Another manifestation of the same light or energy appears as Vaishvanara fire, which is within the human body and by which the food is digested, from the Brihadaranyaka Upanishad. It is for this reason that all the food should first be offered to Bhagavan before it is eaten, so that the food may become transmuted into higher forces.
Mhm.
And then, I looked up at one point what Bhagavan means, and this is related to being a listener, but it's Bhagavan is the voice. Bhagavan is the voice inside of us that actually speaks the divine word, is how I'm going to put it. But I just wanted to add that bit.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Nathan.
Mhm.
Thank you, Nathan. Well, I just wanted to express my sincere thanks, Shobha,
Thank you. Thank you.
for
Thank you.
delivering a beautiful, thoughtful, wise, just wonderful, all the way from the metaphysics to the practical, and how you just embodied in your tone of voice everything you were talking about. So
Thank
I'm not trying to mess you up because compliments are bad that way. But I was just trying to just kind of have us all assimilate and bask in the wonder of your presentation. So thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Next week, we will be hearing about a topic that is extremely timely: Aquarian civilization. So thank you all for your attendance and for your questions. And thank you, Shobha, so much.
Good night,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. Take care, Percy.
You too.